Thank you, Dr. Ron Edgecombe. I remember bumping into Dr. Edgecombe and Ian in the parking lot of Cascades shortly after I finished my doctorate, and Ian and Ron said, "We are a paradox," which took me a minute to get, pair of docs. But it's a real blessing that you are with us and helping us this afternoon. I wanted to mention there is actually a book at the back where you can put your name and sign as a visitor, and we'd be very grateful if you did so, a visitor logbook. And I think that's about it. I want to really be talking about my dad because it is his day. And I thought I would start with some of my earliest memories. I remember being in Gilead Medical Mission in Shoreditch, a place my wife and I walked by a number of years ago while we lived in England. Now a very Muslim area, it was then at that time a Jewish area, an area for immigrants still. And Jews were immigrants, many British Jews were actually new immigrants from Europe, having fled the Nazi regime. And the medical mission provided free medication, free medical care in a time before the National Health Service had been established. And my father would sit in the waiting room, and I always loved going there and seeing him sitting in the waiting room, chit-chatting to all the people who were coming in to get their medical care. That was his job, being the schmoozer of the mission, and that was his opportunity to, as the Lord provided opportunity, to share the gospel with those people. I remember the furrier down below with whom my father established a relationship, where he actually got some furs that we brought even to Canada back in the days when you could have a fur shop in London without PETA banging on your door. I remember going to the beach with him, and we children would go to the beach, and English beaches are typically very pebbly rocks. And my father would have this knack for finding rocks that were edible. And he would say, "Look at this one." And he'd give us a rock that was actually a candy. And when he revealed the secret, of course, we loved and always hoped to go to that candy store that sold little pebble-shaped candies, or sweets, as we call them in England. Ben, Rivka, and I all remember going to Cornwall every year on holiday for 2 to 4 weeks. We would go in this minuscule Mini Minor, Austin Mini Minor, with wooden doors at the back, or wooden frame on the doors anyway. Somehow we would fit in there. Our luggage would fit into a little trailer that we brought behind us in this tiny car. We would drive along these windy roads, and we would end up in cow pastures where we would camp. On 1 or 2 occasions, the cows would come up to the door of the tent and say hello. And on at least one occasion, we had a tremendous storm that threatened to blow everything away. But we remember that. And in connection with that, I also remember Papa taking the engine out of that Mini more than once, picking it up, unbolting it, taking it into the house to rebuild on the kitchen table. He was very capable in many different ways, and any handicraft skill that I have today, and Ben's very handy as well, we got our start with our father, Elie. I remember rolling on the floor with him on Osler Street in Vancouver, and I remember sitting in the bay window of our home, 52 Hammersmith Grove, waiting for him to come home from work, as he first worked at, while I was in my memory at a metal box company, developing different types of cellophanes, and later on with the Gilead Medical Mission, waiting for him to come down the road in his little car. It was the highlight of the day because we just loved him. He would then be on the floor with us there, and I'm told that's because he was exhausted, and we kids could pile onto him. We didn't know he was exhausted. We just loved his love for us. I love the fact that he was both firm and flexible. He had unchangeable convictions. When he found Yeshua, Jesus, his Messiah, he never turned back. Although once or twice he confided that things were difficult for him from time to time in terms of his personal faith, he persevered. He was a man of faith who proved that our walk with God is one not an inhuman thing, but a very human walk with God that he had, one that was nurtured by hours of personal devotion every day, reading the entire Bible through, both in its Hebrew and Aramaic sections and in the Greek. His flexibility was shown in the fact that having been taught in a certain direction, he did not feel that Messianic Jewish congregations were the way in which they should go. And Alan Gilman, whom he had brought onto the staff of Bible Testimony Fellowship, the branch of the IJS in Vancouver, for a number of years, Alan Gilman would talk to my father about this new movement and remonstrate with him and talk and argue to some degree. And eventually my father came around and agreed. He would never have done that if he didn't believe it was absolutely the right thing to do and defensible from the scriptures and from good missions practice. He always believed that missions should be characterized by the missionary working themselves out of a job, and he subscribed to the early missiologists who argued that those reaching people with the gospel should seek to establish communities that are self-led, that are self-funded, and are self-taught. And the final memory is being told just a few days ago how the people at Menno Home, where my father lived with Mama for a number of years, that in Menno Home, they knew him to be always, as much as he could, at his little desk with his Bible open. He may not have been able to read much in the final days and weeks. It was very difficult. But nevertheless, the Word of God was his sustenance. And so I'm very grateful and very honored to have my father to be Eliyahu Jacob Nessim. Thank you.
It's so good to see you all here, and I confess I cried when I drove into the parking lot. I thought maybe 20 people would come. I'm so touched that you all made the effort to come here and honor my father, so thank you for that. I was always very close to my father. And I would like to read to you something that my eldest daughter wrote. And I'm glad to say that my daughters also learned to be close to my father and appreciated him for who he was. Rinatia, her name means a joyful song to the Lord. She's the eldest grandchild, the first of her generation in all our families. And we were very privileged, thank God, that we were able to come back as often as we did and have my parents in Israel as often as they were able to come so that they could establish this bond of love with their grandchildren. This is what she writes. Remembering Saba, Elie Nessim. As a child, I was close to him. I always valued his sense of humor and his affinity to puns. He was a clever man who enjoyed puzzling riddles of logic and numbers. He was a bookworm with his own study library and comfortable desk, a self-scholar, and was insightful in all he studied. He was known for his high sense of integrity and was at peace with people around him. He also, I don't know if you know this, but my father was a redhead. And it's true. The peppery, my daughter calls it peppery temper. Yes, that was his. He had a red-headed temper, making him pilpeli, which means peppery in Hebrew. My favorite stories about him, which he wasn't proud of, were of how he and his closest brother Albert initiated naughty pranks as kids. For instance, in India, they dropped a water balloon from the balcony directly onto the head of a doomsday prophet. Or there was the time that they rolled rocks down a hill onto the tin-roofed huts below and thought it was absolutely hilarious to see the people scampering out of these poor little huts at the noise that these rocks would make. I have to add that that ended when the villagers set the dogs on them. I will remember Saba's chuckle as he would half-embarrassedly admit to being such a rascal. He spent time with my family as I was growing up, sometimes visiting in Israel, and sometimes we visited him and Savta Judith in Vancouver. We would spend weeks or even months at a time. When he or Savta were here, they basically lived with us. I remember how happy I was when I discovered my favorite Beethoven symphony is also his favorite, the Sixth, or how much he loved songs that I discovered on my own, such as Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree with Anyone Else But Me. During my last visit alone, I think in 2014, I got to spend time with him alone for one evening when Savta was in hospital for a fall and I had missed my flight back home consequently. And he daunted me with word riddles and mathematical puzzles, which made him seem pretty clever and cool. It was a window into his younger self, constantly challenging his logic and inventing creative ways to pass time. For the past few years, our relationship was reduced to me sending letters to the Menno home, which were read to him, and meetings on Zoom on Friday nights with the wider family, which he probably appreciated, although he didn't seem to relate to the screen too much. Saba lived a full life and has been surrounded by loved ones. My third daughter, 6 months ago, had my father's second great-grandson. He has 3, the delightful little Max, who he absolutely adored. He's 3 now. And then there's this lovely little puffy-cheeked baby, Magnus, who's 3 months. And then my grandson, Elisha. Elisha, or Elisha, my daughter wanted to make it very clear to everyone that he is named after her Saba. It's her prayer that just as Elijah the prophet threw down his mantle onto his protege, Elisha, and passed his spirit onto him, that is her prayer for her little son, Elisha. And that is my prayer for him too. As a daughter, I can say that my father was the most empathetic, caring, compassionate, and kind father I could ever hope for. He didn't always believe in making things easy for us or preventing us from having to go a difficult way. And I remember that there was a time when I went to a German school once a week. And the second year there was traumatic. I didn't understand anything. It was for kids from German families, and they spoke German, and I didn't. I was trying to learn it. And I would cry every Friday night. I didn't want to go. And my mother had said, if you start something, you have to finish it. And I had agreed, so fair enough, I had to see the year through. Well, Papa got on his bike, and he rode with me every morning to that school. And he was there when the doors opened 3 hours later to ride with me back home. That was Papa. Daniel has already mentioned his daily routine. Papa was not available to anyone before 11. For breakfast, yes, and he would walk with us to school, yes, but for people from outside, for phone calls, whatever, he was not available because he was with God. He was praying and he was studying the Word. When he was a new believer, he read a verse in the Bible that said that the days were coming when the Word of God would be scarce. And he vowed with himself then that he would learn as much as he could and draw as close to God as he could in preparation for those days when the Word of God was scarce. One more thing I'd like to share about my father was that he believed in keeping a short account with God. He always said that King David, though King David did some pretty awful things, yet when he died, it says that God called him his friend, a man after his own heart. And he said that was because David kept short accounts with God. He did terrible things, but he repented, and he turned away, and he completely forsook his sin. And that was my father's motto in life. That's what he took care to do. He had a very tender conscience before God. And I hope and I trust that my brothers and I will be able to give honor to his memory, to continue in the way that he raised us. We all loved him very, very much. Thank you.
Hello. I too was pretty surprised. I showed up here and I thought there'd be a few cars, and I'm so happy that all of you could make it here and show your respects to my father. He was a pretty amazing man. One completely unrelated thing is there are sandwiches later, and I forgot to talk to the caterer, so I imagine some of them will be ham. If this bothers you, please look before you bite. Okay? Those were beautiful talks by Daniel and Rivka, and clearly by people that took notes. I have not taken notes. I've had a jumble of thoughts in my head for the last week, and things that I've been considering. Lisa and I moved to Abbotsford in 2001, and my parents followed in 2010, and they moved into a condo that was near enough that we could visit regularly, and we started seeing that more help was needed. And then, as I'm sure you all know, my father was diagnosed with Parkinson's. We've been watching that, for the last 10 years as that disease has slowly taken over. A guy that previously wasn't on anything more than aspirin occasionally for a headache. Or I think he might have taken them just for general health. So it's been very hard to watch, and obviously the memory of the way he was in his last days is very much with us. But I like to remember the man that you see on these pictures as he was younger, as a younger husband and father, the man that took us camping, would pull out his knife and whittle, one time getting mixed up between that piece of wood and his thumb. But the man that made it fun when we were on long trips, on one particularly long drive to Louisiana, he came up with a storyline, and every day he would make up a chapter, as I guess, of that story. And I still remember the name of it today, and it was to do with where we were going to a hot spring, to a geyser. He always tried to make things fun. He always kept things organized really well. I remember in that tent trailer that we pulled along, there were these very neatly organized cubbies that he had made to put all our things. And I remember, most of all, a man that was always there for us. Like if we needed anything, he would do what he could to help. I knew I could rely on him. He has been my example of how to be a decent person, and a decent father and husband. Feel free to check with my family on comments about that, but I think he taught me well. And one of the nicest things he ever said to me was that he thought I was a good father, and all I could think was, all I'm trying to do is be as good a father as you were. And so I encourage you to remember the man that was, and honor him in that way. Thank you.
Shalom. These are a number of emails the Nessim family has received, and these are all people that knew Elie from different organizations, so I'd just like to read some of these to you. From Janice Burling, Office Manager at Chosen People Ministries, Canada. I'm so sorry to hear of your dad's passing. Although I rejoice to know he is now with the Messiah, I have always remembered Elie so fondly. He was particularly kind and welcoming to me each time we saw each other at the Vancouver Mission Fest and when I visited Kehillat Zion. Joel Gray, past president of Chosen People Ministries of Canada. Your father was a wonderful man who blessed many through his life and ministry. Dr. Richard Harvey, the UK mission leader and scholarly high regarded by Elie. I'm so sorry to hear of your father's passing. I met him several times over the years and was always impressed by his gentle spirit and his deep faith. May the Lord comfort you and all who mourn in Zion. Barry Rubin, president of Leader Ministries. Your father was such a major mensch. I'm sure the Messiah is glad to have him with him now. Gary Hendrick, president of Christian Jew Foundation. Elie was a special brother, for sure, and he will be greatly missed in our movement. May his memory be a blessing. Jonathan Singh, elder at the Heather Bible Chapel. I remember your father. He was a friend of my father's and spoke so many times at Night Road. I remember as a child. When my father passed 21 years ago, we had people come to our home as many relatives unsaved came. And during the week at night, your father came and shared the gospel in our home. Jorge Sadaka, president of Chosen People's Ministries Canada. I remember him dearly the few times I met him while in Vancouver. He used mightily by the Lord to reach out to our Jewish people with the love and hope of Messiah Yeshua. His example of faithful service for so many years is an inspiration to all of us. He will be missed tremendously. Rob Steiler, a friend of Elie and Jewish missions leader. So sad to hear about your dad. I first met him many years ago at an LCJE meeting. Both he and your uncle were very special people. Just want to say a little bit here myself. I had a bit of an advantage. Elie always had a 10-minute question period at the end of his sermons. I don't know, everybody remembers that? That attended Kehillah, so we always had 10 minutes we could ask him a question, and he always knew the answers. And if he didn't, he said he'd get back to you in the next Shabbat. But I had a bit of an advantage. When he moved to Abbotsford, he needed a ride sometimes to Kehillah. Well, that took 45 minutes from Abbotsford to the Kehillah. So I had 45 minutes of questions for him. And he was always very patient with me, and he always had the answers. So it was a good time, and I was just an honor to be able to sit with him driving in. Rabbi Michael and Florin Gertzman, dear friends and co-founders of Zion Messianic Fellowship. Dear Daniel, we were informed of your father's passing last night. It impacted us deeply. It would be an understatement to say that he has gone to his reward. Many crowns await him for his faithful service to the Lord Yeshua. I am but one who is indebted to your late father. He mentored me in so many ways while I was still young in the Lord. He helped me to appreciate and cling to my Jewish heritage as a Messianic believer. when the church would have had me assimilate and forsake it. We send our sincere condolences to you, your mom, your brother Benjamin, and to your sister. Be assured that your father's legacy will far outlive him. I am but one of his beneficiaries of his work. And from David Nessim, a nephew in Israel. I'm sorry to hear the sad news. He was Dad's favorite person. Every second childhood story was when Uncle Elie and Pune, Switzerland, Kilburn, Kinley College, or something. George Moore bicycles, even my own birth was in Uncle Elie's house. 52 Hammersmith Grove. With you, Benjamin, hiding under the bed. What is for sure is that my dad left us with many funny stories and happy memories which we never forget. And a big part was Uncle Elie, his beloved. Rich Carruthers, who was a past elder at our Kehillat Zion. I am praying for you and as you thank our Heavenly Father for your earthly father and give the Lord praise for Elie's life and ministry. I am also praying for comfort for you and your family, and especially for your mom. Please give my love to her and to all the family. David Brickner, President of Jews for Jesus. May his name and memory be for a blessing. I knew your dad, Elie, and we spent time together when I brought the liberated Wailing Wall to Canada. He was a wonderful servant of Yeshua and had established an amazing legacy of honor to the Lord. I have prayed today for the Lord's grace to be present and added measure in the days to come. Finally, from Barbara Fernandez. When I heard that Elie had graduated into his celestial home, heaven, I was sad, but also happy that he is before his heavenly Abba, whom he loved so much. I remember the time that Elie came to visit us. I was with bed rest due to a smashed heel bone and could not move. A squirrel came through the attic window and got completely lost between our furniture. Tony, my late husband, and Elie chased it around the house for a while until it did exit from the front door. What a relief. Maybe the side of your dad we did not know. As for us, he was always the most profound Bible teacher we had studied with. Dig into the scriptures to find the golden nuggets.